So I think one of my favorite parts of the film is that part where the team has just told you, well, we could just find the structures for all the proteins and just release those. And then you release them to the world and you see the map of the globe light up as people in real time are getting all of those structures. What was that like? Tell me, what was the feeling that you had?
I mean, look, there were so many amazing moments, and the team will remember this. But that was one of the big highlights. It was very satisfying to see that this sort of idea that maybe if we crack this really important problem, potentially millions of researchers around the world will make use of it, and to see that sort of lighting up all across the globe is really a kind of humbling and amazing experience.
I came here for the AI for Science Forum, which you held, and I think the thing that shocked me is that for 50 years, the work of tens of thousands of scientists revealed the structures of 150,000 proteins. That was the grand sum of human effort. And then in a few years, your team, small 15, 20 people, was able to find the structures of 200 million.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, first of all, the first thing to say is we couldn't have done it without the first 150,000, right? So that incredible, we need to thank the structural biology community, thousands of researchers painstakingly putting together these structures using very exotic and pretty expensive and complicated equipment over 50 years, like you say, and the sum total is 150,000, but it was enough to kickstart us to be able to create a system like AlphaFold to learn from those 150,000 and then actually learn further from its own predictions, the best ones of its own predictions, and sort of feeding that back into the system, and then eventually being good enough to kind of understand something about protein, something fundamental about protein structure, so then eventually we could do all 200 million. And I think, as John says in the film, it usually takes a PhD student their whole PhD. That's kind of a rule of thumb of to find the structure of one protein. So 200 million times 5 years, 1 billion years of PhD time, which is quite something to have done in a year.
See, I feel like I didn't get it before I came here and I heard those numbers and I was like, oh, things have fundamentally changed. And I don't think the world gets it yet. No. So I think that's one of the exciting things about this film. And I think another thing that's really important to keep in mind is you figured out all 200 million, now they're out there, but the discoveries and the breakthroughs that are going to come from that, they're going to take decades, but we are going to be reaping the rewards of that for decades, centuries.
I think so. I mean, it's sort of opened up, and this is why we put out there into the world. We knew we could only think of a tiny fraction of what the entire scientific community might do with it, and it's really gratifying to see the whole range of things that people are already doing. Over 2.5 million researchers from pretty much every country in the world working on their really important biology and medical problems and making great progress with that. And right now, I think it's super well known in the scientific community, but as you say, I don't think it's appreciated yet in the general public what this is going to do. But I think that will come in the next 5-10 years as we start getting AI designed drugs that will help by things like AlphaFold and many other amazing things for society that will come as a downstream consequence of us knowing what these structures are now.
Can you think of any examples that have happened since the film?
Well, there's many. In fact, a few of them were mentioned in those headlines. These ideas of designing enzymes, which are types of proteins, that catalyze certain reactions, and maybe we could modify some of these enzymes to help deal with some environmental issues we have, like the amount of plastics in the oceans, or perhaps doing even carbon capture, things like this. I think an incredible opportunity, and obviously the main reason I was interested in doing protein folding was to accelerate drug discovery, and we spun out a company, a sister company called Isomorphic Labs, that actually is developing other technologies around AlphaFold and the newer versions of AlphaFold to actually start. Not only do you understand the structure of a protein, but then you could design a drug compound to bind to the right part of the protein surface once you understand what its structure, what its function is. And that's the beginning of understanding disease and maybe trying to cure some of these terrible diseases. And we're working on, cancers and cardiovascular diseases, all sorts of things, more than a dozen drug programs. And one day, I hope we'll be able to reduce drug discovery down from taking like 10 years on average to go from understanding a target to having a drug in the clinic to, maybe a matter of months, perhaps even weeks, just like we did with the protein structures.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. I wanted to ask you about your origin story. Something that occurred to me, well, here's my thinking, right? AI, in a way, is not new. Dates back to the 40s and maybe 50s. And it went through a series of sort of booms and then busts, or AI winters, as people refer to them. I think in the film you said there's no point in being born, ahead of your time, 50 years ahead of your time. So I think that my question for you is, when you were graduating from Cambridge, that was kind of an AI winter. Did you see something that other people didn't see that led you to know the time for AI was coming? Or were you just obsessed with this idea of intelligence and just ridiculously lucky to be born in this moment?
Well, look, it's a bit of both, I would say. So, and actually there's many people in the audience, many of my colleagues and friends who've been with me almost that entire journey. You saw some of them, David Silver, Ben Coppin, Shane Legg, and they'll remember this very well, and Tim Stevens. And it's, look, I have to be honest, I would have done it no matter what, because when I was growing up, and you saw that with the chess and other things, I just felt that intelligence and therefore artificial intelligence was the most fascinating thing one could work on. My passion was to try and understand the universe around us, sometimes call it the nature of reality, all the big questions. So physics was my favorite subject at school, and all the big physicists, Richard Feynman and Steven Weinberg, all the great physicists, Carl Sagan. But I sort of thought that we needed another helping hand, like a tool that could help us as human scientists understand the world better around us. And that for me was obvious to me from the beginning, when I was a teenager, that it would be AI, and it would be not only the most maybe most powerful tool to help us do science, but the most interesting thing to develop in itself. Interrogate what intelligence is and try to understand what it is, and while you're trying to build something that is intelligent. So I think I was always going to do that. But also, when you look at these AI winters and you look at the state of technologies, you find it, you have to have a good reason why you think you might be able to try it in a new way. Those winters are in a way, learning, opportunities to learn. Why did those methods not work? Those deep blue methods that we saw that beat Garry Kasparov, amazing, they could win the chess, but really was a little bit of a dead end because they were hard programmed, hard coded to only do that one thing, play chess. So it wasn't, in some sense, was missing the essence of intelligence in many ways, this generalness and this learning capability. And we knew we had these techniques, they were very nascent, neural networks, became deep learning, and then reinforcement learning, as you heard. We knew those techniques could potentially scale. Why did we know that? Because actually the human brain is a form of those. We're a neural network. Obviously, that's what inspired artificial neural networks in the first place, was neurons in the brain. And reinforcement learning is one of the main ways that animals, including humans, do learn. The dopamine system in the brain implements this form of reinforcement learning. So, in the limit, this must be possible using these types of learning techniques. But of course, you don't know at that point if you're 50 years ahead or not.
Right.
Of your time.
But I just want to be clear on what you're saying.
Yeah.
In essence, you're saying that the AI models that you're currently working with are in some sense analogous to the human brain, or the human brain is analogous.
Very, very loosely speaking, they're inspired by the same types of techniques and approaches biological learning systems use, right? That's the key. It's the learning and the generality.
Do you think then at some point AI will be conscious?
Well, that's a huge question, and obviously, we have to, they're not necessarily agreed upon definitions of consciousness. Obviously, there are aspects of it like self-awareness and things that are agreed upon. I think that's part of the journey. I always felt actually answering that question was one of the things that will come about being on this journey with AI, trying to build artificial minds and then comparing them to what we know about the human brain, and then seeing what the differences are, if any, and those differences might tell us what, and certainly help us understand our own minds better, things like dreaming, emotions, creativity, and things like consciousness, all the mysteries of the mind, and then help us understand them, and then maybe understand how special they are to the substrate that we're in. We're carbon-based versus the silicon-based systems that we're building.
You started DeepMind here in London, and you had certain forces, investors, maybe trying to pull you to Silicon Valley, but you resisted. Tell me what it was about this place or the culture that made you want to stay here.
Well, look, I was born in London. I've lived in London my whole life, and I think there's a lot of amazing things about the cultures that I was immersed in. You saw me going to Cambridge and the sort of golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge, and Imperial as we're nearby, and UCL, all these august institutes. I think the UK has always been very strong in science and innovation. We punch well above our weight. There's also obviously a rich history in computers with Charles Babbage and Alan Turing, so I feel we're trying to carry on in that tradition. But there's some practical reasons. One is that at the time when we started in 2010, there was a lot of talent trained by these top places that unless they wanted to go and work for a hedge fund or something in the city in finance, they wanted to do something really intellectually challenging. There aren't that many companies doing that kind of stuff in the UK, or actually in Europe, really. So I felt that we could gather a lot of talent together very quickly that was probably being underutilized in Europe, and that's how it transpired. But the second reason was that I think AI is so important. It's going to affect the whole world. Obviously, you've heard me talk about in the film that I think it's going to be one of the most important things ever invented. I felt that I do think it needs the international sort of approach and cooperation around what we want to do with this technology, how we want it to be deployed, how we want it to affect our society. It's going to affect everyone in all countries. So I think it needs to be built with more voices and stakeholders than just sort of 100 square miles of California, in Silicon Valley. And also beyond technologists and the scientists just building it. I think it needs social scientists, economists, psychologists, governments, academia, all to be involved in defining how this enormously transformative technology should go.
Yeah, well, it's clearly going to be very powerful. And one of the issues that the film addresses is the morality and ethics around that. And I think particularly the safety of it. What keeps you up at night when you think about AI?
Well, many things, and I don't get much sleep these days, but I for many reasons. But I think Shane and I, will remember this, is that we actually, when we started out in 2010, it's only 15 years ago. It's kind of amazing to see how the world's changed. And in 2010, no one was talking about AI. So nobody was doing it in industry. But we knew that this was this had the kernel of something incredibly important, and we planned for success. So we thought it was going to be a 20-year journey, and often when you do that in technology and in startups and hard sciences, that it always stays 20 years away, right? So somehow, but for us, it really has been 20 years, and we're sort of 15 years in now. And we planned for success, but we knew that success meant all these amazing things, curing diseases, solving the energy crisis, climate, using AI to help all of these things. But also it came with these risks of harm, enormous risks of misuse. And so from the beginning, we've been very cognizant of that responsibility, but also trying to push that debate and be role models about how to develop this technology in a responsible way.
Is this potentially unstable in that you could have 100 companies who have the utmost ethics and morality and they think about safety to an extreme level, and you have one actor who doesn't, and then it ruins it for everyone?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the huge risks that I worry about today is, so-called race dynamics, right? Race to the bottom. There's many examples of this in history, right? And even if all the actors are good in that environment, let alone if you have some bad actors, that can drag everyone to rush too quickly, to cut corners, these kinds of things. Because in individual, it's a sort of tragedy of the commons situation. For any individual actor, it sort of makes sense, but as an aggregate, it doesn't. And I've been saying that for a long time, and Shane and others, many others, Helen and people work on responsibility at DeepMind. We've been talking a lot about this, and that's why I was so pleased to see some of these international summits being set up. The first one in the UK at Bletchley Park, and then just recently in Paris that Macron hosted, President Macron. And I think we need those kinds of international debates about where this is going. And one of the big problems is how do we give access to these technologies? And you've seen with AlphaFold, open to the world, open science. Obviously, that's better for progress than amazing. All the good researchers and the good people around the world can build on top of that work and do amazing things with it. But at the same time, you want to restrict access to that same technology to would-be bad actors, whether that's individuals or even rogue nations. And it's very hard balance to get right. There's no one's yet got a good answer for how you do both of those things.
I think initially I was encouraged by the amount of effort required to develop AI. So there's many references in the film to the Manhattan Project. And I think it's one of the benefits of nuclear weapons that in order to develop them, you actually need basically state sponsorship or a huge undertaking. And initially, AI looked the same way. This is going to take the huge tech companies or states to develop this. But lately, there's these new developments like DeepSeek, and there's an Alibaba model, and they look much more sort of thrifty. Which I think there could be a fear that really democratizes the access to this technology, increasing the probability of a bad actor.
So look, you're exactly right, and I feel like this. It's very good on the one hand. More people accessing these technologies. Hobbyists, kids like I was back when I was tinkering around with theme park, can now work on some really interesting AI systems and probably come up with amazing new applications. But yeah, it's available to everyone, and it is worrying. And I feel like maybe we need some new approaches, where maybe the market environment or something else is set where it kind of incentivizes the right behavior, right? So, I was talking to some economist friends of mine, and maybe they need to get involved now to set up the right incentive structures so that actually the players and the actors that have the right intentions, backed by government, society, are actually the ones that get successful, and those AI systems are more powerful and more productive. And maybe we have to start thinking about those kinds of approaches to deal with the practicality that we're in, which I'd much rather there be a calm, CERN-like effort towards AGI, these final few steps. But given the geopolitical framework we're in, maybe that's not possible. So we have to be more pragmatic about it.
For sure. In the film, you talk about how the future will be radically different. So I want to ask for myself and for everyone in this audience, given that you were one of the leaders at the forefront of this, what do you think the world will be like in 5 to 10 years? Do you have an outlook on that? And I guess further to that, I have 4 kids. I'm like, what do I do with, do I send them to school? Is that even worthwhile anymore? So you are the guy that I want to ask this question to more than anyone in the world.
Sure. Well, let's start with the same question. For sure, send them to school. I say to my kids too, look, I think the next 5-10 years is going to be, it's a bit, what I would say to kids these days is embrace the new technologies. And as parents, I think, let your kids play with them. They're coming, and they're going to increase productivity, creativity. I think it's going to be amazing. It's a bit like my era, my generation with computers, the advent of computers. There was a lot of fears about that too, and even gaming. And then people work out, if you're growing up with that, it feels natural to you, second nature. And then they're often the ones that can extend it into new ways we couldn't even dream of today. So I think a lot of that's going to happen. So I still think it's important to do maths and computer science, because you'll be best placed to take advantage of these frontier technologies and use them in new ways. So the recommendation, I think, is the same as it's always been. Maybe just be prepared that things are going to move even faster, and to learn, about adapting and learning to learn, actually, learning quickly to adapt to a new technology that's going to come out. It seems like almost every week. In terms of society, what I see happening is, 5-10 years is a long time in AI, hard to predict that far ahead. But what I certainly imagine in the areas of science is, I think, a new renaissance, almost a new golden age, which I hope AlphaFold is just the beginning of us understanding and making lots of breakthroughs in many areas of science and helping us with all the biggest questions, from curing all diseases to helping with new energy sources and climate. And I think we're going to start seeing that all in the next 10 years.
That's extraordinary. Well, I look forward to it. I hope you do as well. We're going to leave it there. But yeah, congratulations on all your great work and winning the Nobel Prize. And it's just tremendous, seriously.
Thank you.